Hello, everyone. My name is Jordyn Smith, and as most of you know, my name. I am the voice and the astrologer of this YouTube channel, Nonconformist Conscience. I also have a web page and all the social medias where you can find me of the same name. I feel like I always have to get that out. So, this is the week that so many people have been talking about. We have this Jupiter Uranus conjunction happening at 21 degrees Taurus. This is happening on the 20th here in the United States and other parts of the world. It will be happening on the 21st. So, there's a few things happening before this conjunction, and then there is a pretty big dynamic also happening the day after that I haven't really heard a lot of people talk about, but I feel like it's just so pertinent to this astrology. This week we have Mercury retrograde passing back over Chiron at 19 degrees. This is happening today on the 15th. 19 degrees is where that solar eclipse happened last Monday. We then have Mercury retro is going to conjunct Venus on the 19th. But on the 17th, so 2 days from now, we have Venus conjunct the North Node, which also means it's opposing the South Node. It is the ruler of the South Node. And that is happening while the moon is in Leo, and that speaks to a dynamic dealing with that. So I want to go over all of this because this is the lead up and then the aftermath of this Uranus-Jupiter conjunction, or Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. I had someone point out that I said it backwards the other week and it cracked me up. Anyway, so here we go. The way that I am really seeing how this energy is unfolding this week with Mercury retrograde conjunct, Chiron and Venus, again, is Mercury retrograde. I've talked about this. Retrogrades are relive, redo in order to resolve something. Mercury is usually like our left linear logical mind. It is also a planetary pair with Jupiter. So we can see that this is a big dynamic going on this week. It's helping us with this energy. This is also segueing off of last week's eclipse, where there was so much energy that was about, starting something new while also dissolving the old. And so Mercury retrograde conjunct this Chiron, it's really giving us a understanding on an intuitive level. Whenever Mercury is retrograde, it taps more into the Jupiter function because it's wanting us to internalize instead of it becomes more of a yin energy instead of a yang energy. It goes from that left brain to the right brain. Because it's this internal process, it also has more of a Virgo-like feel to it instead of the Gemini feel. Yes, we're taking in information, but we are internalizing it, which is very much what we do in the sign of Virgo. We internalize the information that we're receiving from the feedback that we get from the actions that we take in order to self-improve. And this week definitely speaks to this dynamic. Mercury retrograde conjunct this Chiron at the same degree that this eclipse was at last week on Monday, that Aries solar eclipse, really to me helps us to do this Chironian work of there's so much healing that can be taking place, and the healing isn't, it's like we have this feeling of whenever we heal, we don't have to think about it anymore. It doesn't bother us anymore. Chiron is not that. Chiron is around where we change our awareness or transform our awareness around some type of wound that is just there. It's a wound that it's never going to go away. But instead of that wound being debilitating, to where maybe we're avoiding certain dynamics because they're triggering that same feeling within, that revolves around that wound. Chiron is where we change our awareness to where we can possibly help others along the way after that awareness has changed. That's why it's called the wounded healer. All you have to do is look at the myth of Chiron. So with Mercury retrograde conjunct Chiron at the same degree as that solar eclipse, this is where all of a sudden we can have some intuitive insight into where this awareness needs to change. Chiron is known, it has a shaman archetype to it, and obviously you don't have to be a shaman to access this. Shamans are very natural souls who understand the laws of nature and the universal laws. Shamans, essentially, what they do for people who come to them, they journey to the underworld where their emotions are under the surface of the held within the subconscious, where we can't really sometimes access, like, why did this happen? What did this mean for me? Where we can just feel the pain, but we don't understand the why. And Chiron has this shamanistic quality of really speaking to our ability to tap into journeying into these emotional dynamics. And oftentimes it's just through asking ourselves a question. And with Mercury retrograde conjunct this Chiron, it's very much signaling to that, asking yourself the question of, why did this happen? What does this mean for me? What was I supposed to learn from this? What am I supposed to learn from this? Chiron and Aries can really be these early childhood developmental wounds, or where we've felt like we've lost our ability to have the courage to be our own warrior or warrioress in our life, to champion for ourselves, to keep going. You know, it's where we can actually, on the flip side, feel really stuck. This Chiron and Aries can pull in the cardinal cross energies because there's these natural squares happening. So it can be on a Capricorn level where we are suppressing where we felt hurt from a very young age. Maybe we lived in an oppressive household or a very authoritarian household where our parents essentially were teaching us that the only feeling or emotion that's acceptable is happiness and joy. And that's really not the totality of the human experience. And so we have learned to feel guilt or shame, or to judge ourselves when we don't feel anything except for that. It makes me think of my stepfather, who I absolutely love. He is now passed, but he used to always be happy. The only time he ever, and he has Chiron and Aries, by the way, the only time he ever got upset, and this is very fitting because today is tax day, is it was on like around doing taxes. Like, this is like the proverbial Boy Scout. He never cussed unless it was like around tax season, and you would hear him drop F-bombs, and it would make me giggle because it just sounded so not normal to hear him do that. But I remember growing up and asking him, like, why and how are you always so happy? He was like, happiness is a choice. You know, I just don't let things bother me. But he grew up in a small town in Texas, and he definitely, his father was a Green Beret. So there was this that also speaks to Chiron and Aries, right? Like, you could see the father figure within this. But this was someone who absolutely suppressed his emotional dynamics unless it was happiness or joy. He refused to have the total human experience. And it's because he felt guilt and shame around it. Chiron here can also pull in Cancer, the other square, which is where we can feel insecure whenever it comes to exploring our emotions. It can also pull in that T square to Capricorn and Cancer, of where we feel insecure whenever we explore our emotions, and we feel shame and self-judgment and fear around exploring our anger, Aries, because anger is something that a lot of us have been taught that we shouldn't be feeling, that we're bad if we feel that way. And then it can also pull in its polarity of Libra in a wounded type of way of, I only feel good when I'm proving myself to others. I'm only getting my value whenever I am doing for others, when I abandon myself to where I don't even know who I am anymore because I've taken on the values of everyone, my family, Capricorn, Cancer, the emotions of others, or the values of others, pulling in that Libra. And so Chiron here is about really having us explore our anger, our rage, because anger and rage are something that is, to me, I really feel like it can be a secondhand emotion. It's very natural, but usually what it points to is, I feel hurt, I feel sad, I feel betrayed, I feel all of these really intense feelings, and I feel guilt for feeling angry at someone else, especially if you have more of a kind of masochistic, sadomasochistic dynamic that might be happening in your own chart. Mercury retro conjunct this is about having the courage to relearn in order to resolve. The courage to look at how what we learned could have wounded us. And the natural expression of Aries is about having independence and the freedom to self-explore, to understand who one is on a very subjective level. Think of a child. Everything is subjective to them. They naturally are carrying Aries energy because they need the freedom to explore. Think about whenever, even as babies, we give them tummy time to explore so they can figure out, these are my hands and this is how this works. And, then they get older and they're learning how to walk, and they fumble and they stumble and they fall, but they're exploring, having the freedom and independence to explore how the world works around them and how to move within that world, within this reality, right? And that's pulling in Capricorn again. Whenever children get a little bit older, they're learning through the freedom and independence of consequences, whether it be positive or negative, of their actions, right? Aries, action. And as adults, we still have this. This is why we all have a first house, Aries, and a Mars in our chart, is because it actually really connects to Virgo. Virgo has a natural inconjunct to this. And it's from that action that we get this feedback in order to, take in that information that we're receiving from the freedom and independence. And then we get to learn, oh, that doesn't really feel good, or, oh, I don't really like that, or, oh, that doesn't feel true to me. And then we get to self-improve. Sometimes it's, I yelled at someone and I hurt them and I don't want to do that again. So the feedback of that person, now I get to understand, I am not going to do that again. Or sometimes this can really be having the courage to have the hard conversations and knowing that if you have a sincere intention, that maybe you are going to hurt someone, but it's not a lie and it's done responsibly. And so this week can also be about really having these difficult conversations with people where we're afraid that if I tell them something, then maybe I'm not going to have a relationship with them anymore. So it can evoke a sense of insecurity. But ultimately, this week, there is something new wanting to start around our awareness of these Chironian wounds. And it's going to take courage for us to resolve them. It's going to take taking in new knowledge, right? You know, Saturn is sextile, semi-sextile this. So there's this, and Mars is in Pisces, the ruler of this. There is something that is wanting to heal and dissolve. And it might take courage to take an action, to take an initiative in order for the healing to take place, in order for dissolving of the old ways we've structured things, the old ways we've learned things, the things that have been conditioned around this can take shape. That eclipse that happened last week was really about, in order to start this new stage of evolution, Aries, a state of becoming, a state of understanding who one is on a very different way, we have to start to initiate a birth of this. And that birthing process gives us feedback as we step into the world, you know, going back to that archetype of childhood, in order to receive feedback that we can learn the truth about ourselves. And that's so much that I see with Mars and Pisces, is like taking initiative, having the courage to create action, even if it's uncomfortable, for healing to happen, and a culmination of old dynamics to take place in order for us to start to understand who we are in a more authentic way. And this really speaks to this Jupiter Uranus conjunction that's happening. So it's really cool that this is taking place this week before this conjunction. On the 17th, we have Venus in Aries conjunct the lunar north node, opposing the south node, which it rules that south node. So Venus in Aries, I actually had a friend see me last week, and she has Venus in Aries. And whenever I asked her what it is, what are you wanting to know or understand as I'm looking at your chart? And she was like, I want to know why I'm fiercely independent. And I was like, that's so funny, because she has a Venus in Aries and it's ruled by a Mars in Leo. And being fiercely independent with someone who has a Venus in Aries is because they're really trying to understand who they are whenever it comes to their relationship to self, right? You need freedom and independence to understand what your values are, what your needs are, what your inner resources are. That's all this Venusian dynamic. And we can see that with Venus opposing the South Node in Libra, something is wanting to be thrown off. It's in a full phase opposition. So it's like, have extremes happened around where maybe we weren't accessing our freedom and independence, or maybe we were, but we were overdoing it. Maybe we were doing it so much that it created inequalities in our relationship because we didn't give time to hear where another one was coming from, or to sit with another one in reciprocity. So there's this need to look at where maybe we have abandoned ourselves in relationship to others, and it's created an extreme. Libra, maybe it's where we've become enmeshed with someone or codependent with someone, and we've been working through this year, and we've understood it and intellectualized it and gotten into our emotional body. But now Venus in Aries conjunct that north node says, in order to come back into harmony and balance, we're going to have to give ourselves some freedom and independence to understand what it is that we exactly need and want desire with our relationship to self and relationships with others. So this is a time for a new cycle of being in a state of becoming. I'm reintegrating my individuality, and maybe I've lost sight of my individuality through avoiding or you know, avoiding topics within relationships because it makes me uncomfortable and I don't know how to access it. Or maybe it's about, you know, always doing one another wants and never having the time to do for yourself. This can also be like where we see relationships where you get with someone and you have your own likes, and that person really doesn't want to have anything to do with what you like, but wants you to have everything to do with what they like, or vice versa. This Venus conjunct the North Node is saying, hey, we can create interdependence within relationships. We can still stay whole unto ourselves. But if you don't know what that looks like, this is a week where we can really start to understand this. We can start to understand why we need independence to self-actualize, to discover, to self-improve. It's about learning who we are and taking baby steps, because maybe we've learned so much about how we should be or how we ought to be or how relationships should be that we don't really know how to connect with ourselves. And Venus and Aries is about the need to connect with oneself through discovering, right? Through self-discovery is the way that I would really look at it, especially with the energies of this week. Keeping in mind that that Jupiter Uranus conjunction is going to be ruled by this Venus. So again, throughout this week though, Venus ruling that Uranus Jupiter conjunction, that's balsamic energy until the 20th. There's a culmination process happening around what we believe, what we give meaning to, where we've over-identified with it, how it's affected how we talk to ourselves, our internal talk, that would be Taurus, how it's affected our nature, our authentic nature. And so this Venus conjunct the North Node not only highlights what needs to be thrown off, but it's starting to initiate a new cycle of where we're wanting to go as the Jupiter-Uranus dynamic is culminating as well. So we could be really having insights on a intuitive level about what it is we're needing to release, but also not really knowing where it is we're supposed to go, because a new phase is very much like taking your first steps. Like it's a little fearful, it's very subjective. There's not enough information yet to have an understanding in a more objective way. And we can see that we're trying to culminate all of the other ways that we've objectified things, but we're needing to start something new, and it's going to be subjective because it's new. So as that occurs as well with Venus on the North Node, the moon is in Leo, and it is going to be in a first quarter trine to that North Node, to Mercury, to Venus, to Chiron, to the sun. And that's where we can have like a feeling of, oh God, I'm at a standstill here. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. Like, and the standstill is because like, oh, this is just what I've known and this is what's familiar. So we have this dynamic of needing to initiate something so that a standstill isn't perpetuated on a growth level. And it's dealing with the North Node Venus dynamic. It's dealing with our Chiron wounds. It's dealing with what we've learned, Mercury. And it's about how we're meant to self-actualize. So the self-actualization, Sun and Aries during this time, It's very much about initiating, taking the first steps to initiate, to understand all of these dynamics, because all of that energy is balsamic to that sun anyway. So it's like this is wanting to culminate the old to start anew for self-actualization. The moon and Leo trining all of this is very much, you know, Leo, I feel like I've said this before, it gets a bad rep. I can't tell you how many times that I've also had clients who have seen other astrologers and they have like a Leo sun or Leo moon, and they receive very detrimental feedback. Like it's really sad to hear about it. Because I think within mainstream psychology right now, narcissism is a really big buzzword, um, or personality disorder that people are really wanting to talk about and highlight. And Leo, yes, that is the archetype of Leo, but it is not the full archetype of Leo. And also, that's the distortion of Leo. Some people are going to be naturally expressing their Leo. So Leo is about needing to be self-focused because you're trying to self-actualize in some type of way. And in order to self-actualize, you can't be putting your energy into external things. You're really needing to be extremely self-focused. So clients who have a lot of fifth house or Leo stuff, I always try to tell them it's okay to give yourself permission to be quote unquote selfish. Like your soul has actually chosen the need to do this because you're needing to understand your own individuality. And that is what Leo is about. It's about learning to understand who am I in a very unique, individualistic way. So we can see that this is trining all of this energy because we're needing to self-actualize and needing to understand who we are on an individual level, what's unique about us, and starting this new cycle and seeing where maybe we haven't been doing that. And that's where that first quarter trine can come into play. Other dynamic that I want to pull in here is with the Leo moon trining all of this, this can be looking at how when we were younger, our parents projected onto us who we should be. And so now we don't know who we are. That's another thing that we do see with Leo moon sometimes is if that was done to them until they heal that within, they can project all types of things onto other people. And it's not because they're trying to hurt them, it's because it's what's known and familiar. So all of these dynamics can be coming up. Like you can be understanding how projected values have affected your sense of self, your ideals around relationships, how you've learned, right? Have you been able to, especially with that Chiron, where you projected upon when you were younger that the only way you have worth is to prove yourself to me. I see that with so many child parent dynamics. So that's this dynamic of where we weren't looked at as unique. We were looked at as an extension of someone. And so this can be a time this week where we're needing to really have self-focus in order to initiate a new cycle so we can understand who we are on an individual level that has nothing to do with how we were projected upon and who we were taught we ought to be, right? It's really signified in this chart. And I don't know a lot of people, it's more often than not that that happens to them in childhood. I do have some clients who absolutely had parents who wanted to understand their individuality, looked at them as an individual, thought that it was beautiful that they were their own person, and really helped to cultivate and foster that because that their parent was naturally expressing Leo Aquarius. But more times than not, in this type of society and how the world is structured right now, that does not happen because there are pressures from society stemming from beliefs and values that's not how we're supposed to be. So and that can also be where our parents, the other dynamic I want to talk about with that moon and Leo, trining all of that energy. And Aries can be where we might feel guilt and shame, especially with that Chiron, around being ourselves or connecting with our independence to do so. Because how many times when we were younger, not all, but a lot of us, we did something and our parents didn't like it, especially if it was in a public setting, or maybe we didn't learn the way that we were supposed to at school. And our parents took it personal, that it was a reflection of who they were. That's the best way to understand if you were a child who was being projected upon. So it can be all of this dynamic and these wounds around this of, I don't know who I am, and the need to understand that. So on the 19th, Mercury retrograde is going to conjunct Venus. This is happening while Saturn in Pisces is in conjunct the lunar south node in Libra. And that lunar south node in Libra is ruled by that Venus that is now conjunct Chiron again. And so, not Chiron, Mercury, excuse me, Mercury retrograde. So again, it's this Mercury retrograde function of relive, repeat in order to resolve something, most likely around our relationship to self on an internal level, or having conversations or understanding something, some type of dynamic where an imbalance has been created in our relationships with others, because that's pulling in that lunar south node. So with Saturn in conjunct that, and it's in a full phase in conjunct, it's about needing to improve upon how we share ourselves with others on equal terms, not a power dynamic, not an overpower, underpower, and looking at and self-reflecting on our ideals around relationships and where that was taught or learned. And then with Mercury retrograde conjunct that Venus, having the time to be able to intuit or to go within and have an internalization process of understanding how these dynamics were created, how the extremes got exacerbated. Also, having self-forgiveness, because sometimes we just don't know, right? That's what we were taught, and we didn't even know we could self-reflect on these because maybe we felt guilty for like looking at where this came from. This is a time where we give ourselves permission. We give ourselves permission also that we didn't know better. I think one of the best gifts I ever had was a very Capricorn Saturn conversation I had with my own father at one point in time. And I feel like this really kind of highlights this conversation of Mercury retrograde conjunct Venus with Saturn and Pisces and conjunct that south node. I remember, and I've talked about this before, but this really speaks to this because that Saturn is pulling in Capricorn dynamics. As most of you know, I am a Capricorn. I have lots of Capricorn energy, and my dad is a Capricorn. And I remember he gave me the gift of wisdom. It was such a pearl of wisdom. I remember I was having so much self-hatred at one point in time, and experiencing futility in its most worst sense, coming from a relationship dynamic that kept playing out in my life, and being so upset at myself that I found myself in the situation, and it hadn't gotten better. It had only gotten worse. And I remember crying to my dad, and he looked at me, and I don't go by Jordyn in my family. My family calls me George or Georgie. And my dad looked at me, and he said, well, the good news, George, is you don't ever have to be that person again if you don't want to. And so there's like this shape-shifting ability that can happen. My friend Narissa, I told this to her, she's one of my friends on the EA message board. She was like, oh, that's such a shape-shifting Capricorn thing. And it is. You don't ever have to be the person that you know that you were. You can forgive yourself and you can do better. You can change through self-reflection. Wisdom in true Capricornian sense. Capricorn's about wisdom, same with Saturn, that comes from self-reflection. But wisdom at the very base of it comes from incorrect judgment. And Capricorn is very much about learning how to make correct judgment. And so this Saturn and Pisces in conjunct the South Node in Libra, ruled by that Venus conjunct Mercury retrograde, is about where we can have this understanding and self-forgiveness of these dynamics, and we can shapeshift. We don't ever have to be that person again if we don't want to. That's the beauty of incorrect judgment. And then also self-reflecting on, where the hell did that come from? Like, where did I learn that? Like, where did I take that in? Where did I learn that that was a way that I was supposed to be in relationships? For me, it was abandoning myself, which is very much a Libra dynamic. But this is this kind of dynamic of really looking at all of this to understand and to forgive yourself. And then it goes back to that Maya Angelou quote, we do the best that we can, and when we know better, we do better. And so this is a day where we can really have that understanding. This is a week where we can have that understanding, because through that understanding, we do get to reharmonize. And then maybe we're left with, I don't know who I am. And so Venus there in Aries, again, helps us to start and initiate a new cycle of understanding who we are in a way that creates independence and freedom and sovereignty, where we can still stay whole unto ourselves. The lessons we learn right now really help us to do that later on if we're consciously working with this. So that leads me to the 20th. This Jupiter Uranus conjunction at 21 degrees Taurus. This is a 13.8 year cycle. So we are going to be working on these dynamics for that long. And guess what? It's going to be in the new stages. So it's not going to be formed. It's about learning, right? It's got this Aries energy. Remember the baby learning how to crawl and then not to touch the hot stove. This is where we're at, people. So Jupiter Uranus conjunction in the sign of Taurus, to me, is really about this liberation from old beliefs of where we might have delusions. This is like the Pisces sextile to Jupiter, this energy going on. Saturn is in Pisces at this time, but Mars is going to be in a last quarter sextile to this Jupiter Uranus conjunction, and Saturn's in Pisces. So it can be where we're understanding where our beliefs might have been delusional and have affected our sense of self-worth and self-esteem. And it's learned beliefs, right? Because we're pulling in Saturn and Pisces. It's how we've been conditioned. So looking at where some of our beliefs have been idealistic and where it's not about Taurus understanding something about ourselves, it's about maybe performing or getting something externally as a form of self-worth, which is really a false sense of self-worth. It's not natural. Jupiter wants us to be authentic and natural. And so this is really about liberating Uranus from where we have overly identified with delusional or false beliefs. And Jupiter wants us to understand our personal truths, our nature, our soul nature. And that's part of Mars and Pisces sextile this Jupiter Uranus. It's like that inner doorway to understanding this is open, and it's always open. Pisces is source. It's our consciousness. And so reconnecting with that and recentering that in a very natural and authentic way, understanding what our own personal philosophy is. This can be different than someone else's, but it's also liberating from where we over-identified with someone else's personal philosophy and viewed it as true, especially if maybe we gave our authority away to another person or external again. So, I mean, even the best way to look at it is like, if you are someone who follows a particular religion, and religion is not, it's not bad. It serves a purpose for a stage of evolution. Same with atheism. I typically see religion more in consensus stages, but that's a personal philosophy. And then they have like the macro of that and then the micro. So the different branches of religion that feel authentic to that person, right? Usually this is something that's learned by an authority figure at a young age. And so there's this need to understand, well, what actually feels true to me? If that still feels true to you, or some type of spiritual cosmology, perfect. I typically see more atheism happen in the individuated stages, and it makes so much sense to me. I actually think it's really beautiful. I was telling my friend who is a therapist, because she was like, I have atheists, keeping in mind we live here in Oklahoma, and she was talking about how she has atheists come in for therapy, and she was like, they don't want to hear any feedback. They actually reject it. And I'm like, whenever I was thinking about it, I'm like, that's such an individuating function, though. If you're trying to individuate, maybe you had a lot of trauma that happened in the consensus stages around religion, you might be throwing off that religion and not knowing what you want to believe in, or maybe you found that atheism feels authentic to you. There's a way to spiritualize through that too. I don't think that people really think about that, but it creates a place of where they can feel authentic to expand upon their inner relationship to self, right? And then we see like a fusing of different spiritualities and the natural principles within. When we get into more of the spiritual stages is typically what I see. People who are more dealing with natural laws and universal timeless kind of things. But so I just wanted to put it out there, if you're someone who's atheist or who's looking at religion or spiritual cosmologies, this is a time where you're really, it's about what feels authentic to you, because through that you can expand upon your relationship to self. That's Jupiter and Taurus. Jupiter is also about like the relativity of truth. What is authentic for me isn't going to feel authentic for someone else. I see a beauty in some of the religious teachings at the baseline of them, but I'm not a religious person, never have been actually. And there was one point in my life where I thought that maybe I was atheist. I kind of went through all of these things because it felt authentic at that time. So this is also this new phase conjunction. So we can be liberating from these beliefs that have been learned by authority figures in our life. And we might be trying on different things until something feels authentic, but it is important to have some type of cosmological viewpoint that we can utilize to understand who we are, to expand upon our relationship to self. Jupiter and Taurus. It's about growing our relationship to self, Jupiter and Taurus, and liberating from where we've over-identified with maybe false beliefs that have affected or impeded on understanding our own individuality and our relationship to self. And that's part of the Uranus and Taurus. And this really can help us transform these dynamics, right? Because we're understanding who we are. Other thing with this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, which is sextile to Mars and Pisces, and I've been touching on this, this is where we can have intuitive ideas seated within our consciousness from our higher intelligence that is connected to source, to our soul, that is about which direction it is that we're meant to take, the desires that are being seeded into our consciousness that we're meant to act on, that could help us to spiritualize at any stage of evolution. Okay, you don't have to be in the spiritual stage to spiritualize. This is like, what idea keeps popping into your head that you're starting to understand, I really have a desire to do this. Maybe I want to take maybe I want to go to a Buddhist temple. Maybe I want to start yoga. Maybe I want to do this. Maybe I want to study that. Maybe I want to go to an ashram. It's all of these things that can happen that help us to expand upon what feels authentic for us, to learn more about what we value and need, because our beliefs create meaning, and meaning begets what we value, and what we value begets what we need. And if we're really trying to expand upon our inner relationship to self, we can see how we are meant to really understand and follow what it is that we're desiring, if it's something that keeps repeating in our mind right now. The other thing is that this helps us dissolve these old structures of where we've given our authority over to someone else, because that's what we have been conditioned to do. And so we have these beliefs that really aren't in resonance with what feels authentic to us. So here's the thing is, this isn't going to be something that you can grasp usually at these beginning stages. And then you throw in the dynamic of Venus and Aries is ruling this Jupiter Uranus. This is a brand new cycle of expanding upon and transforming our relationship to self through understanding these dynamics. So it's taking baby steps, right? From an action, we'll get feedback, and then we'll know what's the next action to take, so I can expand upon and transform this relationship to self, so I can learn more about what it is I need and what it is I value. And hopefully with Venus and Aries, we're learning about self-reliance and independence. Like, being independent can help us create and cultivate self-reliance. That's why Aries comes before Taurus. Taurus builds upon that. So this is a time to really start to cultivate all of these dynamics. Mercury is about to, technically it's conjunct the North Node at this time, and it's retrograde. It will be exact conjunct the next day, but it is very much about what it's going back and initiating a relearning process that's more internalized and dealing with our intuition and what feels authentic to us. Maybe you're learning, how to trust your instinct and your intuition, and this can really speak to that as well. Because when we learn to trust ourselves, we learn self-sufficiency. And then that self-sufficiency helps us to understand how to emotionally validate ourselves. So it's really interesting too, at the time of this conjunction, the moon is going to be in Virgo opposing that Neptune. So we can see guilt, shame, needing to dissolve. This is also speaking to self-improving through taking those steps, through initiating this to expand, to dissolve old structures, to dissolve old desires, because that Neptune is the ruler of this Mars and that Saturn. So there's all of this going on. And then the other thing that I want to mention is that, the sun has entered into the sign of Taurus. So if we're looking at our values and our beliefs and wanting to expand and wanting to transform and wanting to understand who we are on individual levels, the sun is about where we self-actualize, and it's in Taurus. It's about we're self-actualizing through understanding who we are and cultivating a stronger relationship to self, throwing off the need to seek validation externally, going within. This is a time to go within, to be a little hermity. It's a yin process of needing to cultivate that inner relationship to self on a deeper level, as a way to recenter, as a way to connect with our own individuality. That has nothing to do with what has been projected upon us in the past. So the last thing that I want to talk about is happening on the 21st, okay? This is very interesting to me. I don't know why I haven't heard anyone else talk about it. Yes, I've heard people talk about the Venus Chiron conjunction. That's what's going down on this day. So this is where we can heal this relationship to ourselves, essentially, is how I'm looking at this, through reconnecting with ourselves. through doing the Jupiter Uranus new phase conjunction, through taking in we're still in feeling the energetics of the eclipses that happened, right? So this Venus Chiron conjunction really, to me, speaks about massive amounts of healing through taking the courage to reconnect with self and to initiate a brand new process of doing so. This can almost feel like, oh my God, I'm having an identity crisis. Like, who am I? And that is fine. You're going to be right where you need to be if that's happening to you. There's nothing wrong with that. And I want to point that out. But let's dive into this signature a little bit more, because this is really interesting. If we're looking at Venus in Aries and taking in everything that I've talked about for this week, okay? And then taking in what I've talked about with Chiron, we can see that a brand new phase is happening, a brand new cycle dealing with our own healing of our relationship to self and needing to initiate that and to take responsibility for it. This is further demonstrated because that south node of Venus, the planetary south node of Venus, is in Pisces, exactly conjunct Saturn in Pisces, both ruled by Neptune in Pisces. So we can see that we're needing to take the initiative and to be responsible to heal these wounds and dynamics, to reconnect with self, and taking a look at where we've made incorrect judgment in the past, the wisdom that has been gained from it, where we have been idealistic and given ultimate meaning outside of ourselves, and where that has affected or wounded us, where we might have wounded ourselves doing that, right? Because we weren't getting it from within. This is about dissolving how we've structured relationships, how we've structured our reality, stemming from our conditioning, and taking responsibility for our healing, and also understanding that I picked this. I called this in so that way I can absolve and culminate these dynamics in this lifetime, right here, right now. And then the north node of Venus is conjunct Jupiter and Uranus, who are still conjunct at this time. And so that north node is ruled by Venus and Aries, conjunct that Chiron. So we can see how a lot of this is about liberation from false beliefs, false self-talk, delusional beliefs, where we've over-identified with that, where it's affected our self-esteem, how that's wounded us, how we've perpetuated our own wounding by continuing to do that. Maybe we didn't know any better. And it's also about understanding our own individualistic nature. So this week is jam-packed with stuff. And we can see these old dynamics of a Venusian level are wanting to culminate so that it can start new, start fresh. That way we can be in relationships down the line with friends, family, whoever, and make correct judgment, to have discernment, to understand that we're here to have relationships that are rooted in reciprocity, that can really harmonize. But in order to do that, we have to be self-sufficient first, and to know that our value and our self-worth comes from in. It's an inside job. It's not an external job. So this is this week, and I just wanted to speak about this because I was like, oh my gosh, I know I did the conversation with my friend B where we talked about Jupiter Uranus. That was like two friends talking, but I really wanted to break down this week's astrology also pertaining to this Jupiter Uranus conjunction. This is a time where we're starting new. Something isn't formed yet. We are liberating from the old, we are culminating the old, but we don't really know yet what it's going to look like. And that can evoke fear for some people because they're going to want to hold on to the past because it's known and familiar. This is not a week to do that. The last thing I want to say, which is a great Jeffrey Wolf Green teaching, and I have to say I resonate with this. I have Jupiter in Taurus on my ascendant and it's retrograde. I have had really big transits happen to that Jupiter, and it is not always the great benefic. And it's usually not giving me some type of Jupiter gift that, I mean, eventually it does, but it's usually not obtainable or something that's tangible or that I understand or even can intuit. because I'm still holding on to something from the past that is really meant for me to resolve it. And so whenever I let it go and then expand upon my relationship to self and let go of where, and I'm speaking as a Jupiter and Taurus person with the moon and Libra, um, is when I let go of where I've externalized something that I've bought into it being true, that it's going to give me value or whatever, and I let go and I take the initiative to expand upon my relationship to self and to reconnect with my own natural truths instead of the beliefs that I've bought into about myself, the belief that I'm not worthy or that I'm gross or this or that. Whenever I connect with like the timelessness of the truth on a soul level of my nature, I do receive the Jupiter gift. And that most likely and most usually has been where I create more self-sufficiency and self-reliance. And it helps me to emotionally validate myself, and it helps me to connect with source on a very deep level. And it has nothing to do with how I've been taught. So this is the power of this. But just remember, the liberation factor is huge in these charts. And so in order to receive these gifts, you're going to have to liberate from something. And if you're afraid, that's usually the place you need to go, because evolution and growth does not happen from security. It is an insecure process. And the new phase in Aries energy that is been happening the past 2 weeks really speaks to there can be quite a bit of insecurity because it's new, because you're starting something new, you're initiating something. Here's the thing, it gets more comfortable over time. And just as soon as you're comfortable, like the only constant in life is change, right? So getting used to change. But this is a week that is about change, liberation, expansion, relationship to self, reconnecting, understanding one's individuality, initiation, courage, and all of the feelings that come with those experiences. So give yourself grace. This is, I think, a very beautiful time, actually. And it can be uncomfortable. It's not going to be, we don't want to get into like fragmented thinking that it's got to be happy for it to be good. No, this is going to be uncomfortable for a lot of people because it's initiating something new. But you can feel proud of yourself for doing something new, for initiating something, for having courage. And I just want to leave you all with that. And I hope that you all have a beautiful week and happy Jupiter Uranus conjunction. What a great time to be alive, even though the world feels like it's burning down. It's this kind of stuff. The extremes highlighted in the world are only highlighting and mirroring how we have extremes held within each one of us and how we're really supposed to be reconnecting with who we are on a very natural sense. So have a beautiful week, and I will be here next week.